If the world is created by God, why does loving it destroy your faith in Him? This question captures one of Al-Ghazali's most profound paradoxes. We are taught to be grateful for life, for its beauty and opportunity. Yet Al-Ghazali warns that excessive attachment to it is the root of spiritual blindness. In his analysis, the issue is not the existence of the world, but the orientation of the heart toward it. The more one depends on temporal things for identity or fulfillment, the more perception turns away from the real. The ultimate source of being in our modern age of consumerism and digital gratification. This warning resonates with surprising clarity. We have redefined attachment as progress, accumulation as happiness, and self-promotion as success. But beneath these ideas lies a quiet distortion, the confusion of what is temporary with what is true. This lecture explores how Al-Ghazali explained this phenomenon through the psychology of attachment, and how his insights align with modern neuroscience of craving, motivation, and attention. In contemporary culture, the self is often constructed around possession, not only material, but social and psychological. People define their worth by wealth, popularity, productivity, or recognition. Every like, purchase, or achievement triggers a brief reward signal in the brain, mediated by the dopamine system, which reinforces the cycle of desire. Neuroscience identifies this as the reward prediction error. The mind constantly anticipates more pleasure than reality delivers, perpetuating restlessness. Psychologically, this pattern forms what cognitive scientists call an ego reinforcement loop. Each reward momentarily confirms one's identity. I am successful. I am admired. I exist. But like all conditioned responses, it fades quickly, leading to a compulsive search for the next confirmation. Al-Ghazali anticipated this pathology 1,000 years ago. He described it as the disease of the heart, when the faculty designed to know truth becomes enslaved by illusion. The modern brain, overstimulated by endless novelty and social comparison, behaves exactly as he described, aware of everything except itself. To understand the depth of his warning, we must recall who Al-Ghazali was and why his thought remains foundational. Born in 1058 in Persia, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was one of the most influential scholars in Islamic intellectual history, a theologian, jurist, philosopher, and mystic. He mastered the dominant sciences of his age, logic, metaphysics, and law, but eventually confronted a crisis that reason alone could not resolve. Despite his vast learning, he felt inwardly hollow. He realized that knowledge pursued for status or authority produces only illusion. What he called hub al-dunya, love of the world, is not mere attachment to wealth, but dependence on anything that veils the self. From reality, his solution was revolutionary: the synthesis of intellect and purification. Knowledge must be accompanied by tutskiyalongness, the cleansing of motive and attention, for only then can reason fulfill its purpose. This framework, when viewed today, aligns closely with cognitive psychology's understanding of bias and meaning regulation. For Al-Ghazali, every distortion of thought begins as an impurity of attention. Al-Ghazali did not condemn the physical world. He condemned dependence on it as a source of identity or permanence. He defined the world dunya not as a geographical space but as a state of heedlessness, the condition in which transient things dominate consciousness. The world, he wrote, is that which distracts you from God. The phrase does not imply ascetic rejection, but cognitive misalignment. From a rational perspective, this can be understood as the confusion of instrument and end. Wealth, success, and beauty are tools of human flourishing. But when they become ends in themselves, they distort the structure of the mind. The intellect begins to serve appetite rather than truth. In modern terms, this is reflected in hedonic adaptation, the psychological phenomenon where each gain soon loses its emotional impact, leading to an endless pursuit of stimulation. Neuroscientific studies show the repeated exposure to reward stimuli rewires the brain's attention systems, narrowing focus toward external gratification and away from meaning. For Al-Ghazali, this was not moral failure, but perceptual illness, the heart's inability to discern the real from the illusory. How does attachment actually blind the intellect? Al-Ghazali described the process metaphorically as veil. Each desire, he said, places a layer between the self and the real, until the mind can no longer see clearly. When the heart is absorbed in multiplicity, possessions, status, pleasure, it loses its ability to perceive unity. Reality becomes fragmented, interpreted only through personal gain or loss. Cognitive science provides a parallel in selective attention theory. What you value determines what you perceive. The mind prioritizes stimuli that align with emotional investment. This creates attentional bias, a psychological mechanism that filters out all data inconsistent with one's attachments. The spiritual consequence, Al-Ghazali warned, is subtle but devastating. The person begins to rationalize disconnection as normal. The intellect, originally designed for truth-seeking, becomes an instrument of self-deception. One begins to mistake inner noise for understanding from a cognitive standpoint. This means perception collapses into confirmation bias. From a spiritual standpoint, it means the self has replaced the real as its central object of devotion. Al-Ghazali extended this diagnosis to scholars and religious authorities, warning that even knowledge can become worldly. Many scholars, he wrote, are veiled by their knowledge as others are by their wealth. His logic is psychologically precise. The ego seeks continuity through validation. Therefore, even truth can become a possession if sought for prestige or control. In cognitive psychology, this corresponds to motivated reasoning, the tendency for intellect to justify the emotions or attachments. One is unwilling to surrender from a neuroscientific view. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning, can reinforce egoic defense patterns when linked to reward circuits. In such cases, thinking becomes an instrument of protection, not exploration. Thus, love of the world extends far beyond luxury or greed. It includes intellectual pride, spiritual vanity, and moral superiority. True knowledge, Al-Ghazali argued, humbles. False knowledge inflates. The difference lies not in the content but in the orientation of the heart that holds it. For Al-Ghazali, faith, iman, is not mere belief in propositions. It is the orientation of the heart toward truth, a mode of seeing reality without distortion. When attachment is released, perception becomes objective and tranquil. To illustrate rationally, a lens covered in fingerprints cannot reflect light accurately. Likewise, a mind clouded by desire cannot reflect truth clearly. Psychologically, this resembles emotional regulation and cognitive flexibility, the capacities that allow awareness to remain stable amid changing conditions. From a neuroscientific angle, contemplative practices such as mindfulness reduce activity in the brain's default mode network, the neural basis of self-referential thought. When this quiets, perception expands beyond the narrow boundaries of ego. In this state, Faith becomes not an emotional feeling but an epistemic clarity, a structure of consciousness aligned with reality itself. To believe, in Al-Ghazali's sense, is to perceive accurately. To disbelieve is to misperceive under the influence of attachment. Al-Ghazali did not reject love. He redefined its object. The problem is not that the human being loves, but that love is often misdirected. Love of the world fragments attention because it seeks possession. Love of the real unifies perception because it seeks understanding. He distinguishes between desire and devotion. Desire consumes energy in pursuit of control. Devotion refines energy through surrender to truth. From a cognitive perspective, devotion organizes emotional energy around coherent meaning systems, a process linked with psychological resilience. Craving, by contrast, dissipates energy across multiple stimuli, creating restlessness and confusion. Neuroscientific research supports this. When behavior aligns with long-term values, the brain's prefrontal regulation systems dominate impulsive circuits, reducing anxiety and increasing well-being. Therefore, the destruction caused by worldly love is not divine punishment but a natural consequence. The entropy of consciousness. When attention is scattered across desires, the mind loses coherence, and identity itself begins to fragment. What, then, does Al-Ghazali's insight mean for the modern seeker? Detachment, in his view, is not withdrawal from the world, but reorientation of attention. A disciplined recalibration of what the mind considers ultimate. In psychological and neuroscientific terms, this corresponds to restructuring reward hierarchies and reducing cognitive noise. 3 practical disciplines embody this principle. Cognitive reframing. Reevaluate possessions and goals as means rather than ends. This aligns with value-based cognitive therapy, which emphasizes aligning thought with intrinsic rather than extrinsic goals. Mindful presence. Observe desires before acting on them. This practice strengthens metacognitive awareness and enhances response inhibition, reducing impulsive behavior. Ethical recalibration. Engage with the world through service, not ownership. Studies in self-transcendent motivation show that altruistic behavior produces greater and more stable satisfaction than material gain. Neuroscience confirms the physiological benefits of such detachment: reduced amygdala reactivity, enhanced prefrontal control, and greater emotional equilibrium. Spiritually, these mechanisms describe what Al-Ghazali called the purification of the heart, a state where the intellect functions without distortion. Thus, detachment is not asceticism. It is psychological hygiene, the clearing of the cognitive field so that truth can be seen as it is. Al-Ghazali's teaching reveals a subtle but essential truth. Love of the world destroys faith, not because pleasure is forbidden, but because attachment blinds perception. Faith, in his framework, is not blind belief, but cognitive alignment with reality. The mind seeing without distortion. In modern terms, faith equals clarity. Attachment equals confusion. When the heart releases possession, it regains its native function as a mirror of truth. It perceives the world as transitory yet meaningful, as instrument rather than master. Al-Ghazali summarized this transformation simply. Faith dies not when doubt enters the mind, but when the world occupies the heart. To love rightly, therefore, is not to abandon the world, but to perceive it without mistaking it for the eternal. That is the essence of his rational mysticism, a science of perception that restores the intellect. to its rightful clarity.